limits of debate in this country are established before the debate even begins, and everyone else is marginalized or made to seem either to be communist or some sort of disloyal person, a kook, there's a word, and now it's conspiracy. See, they've made that something that should not be even entertained for a minute, that powerful people might get together and have a plan. Doesn't happen. You're a kook. You're a conspiracy buff.
Hello everyone. I am going to try to plan on doing at least a daytime afternoon episode every day if I can, at least on the weekdays, and not really have too long of a discussion, save some of the discussion for the night. Hey Perseus, how's it going? And I think the current plan that I currently have is try to catch people up. I think to look for a lot of, not necessarily answers, but to look for just opportunities to question. And especially in places and topics and discussions where you're really not, well, let me just rephrase that. You're refrained from looking at, whether through societal norms, whether through peer pressure or through government regulation, etc. Therefore, it's going to start getting a little bit crazy, but it's only crazy when you look at it from that perspective. So I will be doing an occult science discussion series. It's going to be restreaming videos from the YouTube channel Schism 206 in the near future, and I may go back to Bill Cooper. I think I've found a couple of things that I found useful within Bill Cooper's series, and I think I may go back to that because it gives us a different perspective from the perspective of about 3 decades ago, basically a generation ago, and how much things might be different in today's search and research of a lot of these esoteric and occult topics. And in regards to that, it's going to start getting a little bit weirder as we go, as I do an episode soon about ayahuasca. I don't know if I even say that correctly, in DMT. I plan on trying that out sometime in the future. Don't know when. I never know when I'm ready, but I just know when I'm willing to be ready. That's all you can ask for yourself. Look, all I can ask is, well, I'm not even gonna ask. I mean, I basically just hope that you will join me in my journey for the truth, not necessarily yours, but that you continue on in your journey. And whether we sync up in our journeys and somewhere along the line, that would be great. But again, this is mine, not yours. Right or wrong, doesn't matter. I'm here to empty my cup and to gain as much knowledge as I can, then use that information that I gained to see where it leads me next. That's all that it can be done. So I'm going to show you a video, a quick video, and then I'm going to show you the documentary. And at the end of the documentary, I will leave a few minutes, maybe 15 minutes to half an hour. I could go for some more, who knows. Again, this is near the tail end of my personal work day of unemployment, if you want to call it. So I do have to pick up the kids and spend time with the family. Then while everyone goes to bed, I am doing my own thing for everyone else and my own journey. Let's see where it goes from there. And again, just want to give you a brief overview. I'll be going through Occult Science, their channel, and go ahead, and there's 91 videos on it. And Perseus recommends working in a few videos of the Thunderbolt Project channel in regards to the electric universe theory, and I think I will. Plus, if anyone has any suggestions, feel free to suggest them. At the most, I could say no, or at the least, I'll say maybe, or, you know, I will. So, ayahuasca, something that I will be covering. I'm not sure when. I'm hoping tonight or at least tomorrow. And so without further ado, I'm going to play this video and then the main documentary video. And then we'll have the discussions afterward.
And all these things that are just kind of like grabbing at us, these doubts and worries, that's your conditioning. You know, I'd give anything if a person would just grab hold of one idea. This one simple idea. Any time that you get feedback telling you why you can't do something, if only, folks, you could remember it's not a reflection of your potential or you as a person, but it is a reflection of your conditioning. I'd give anything for a person just to understand that. When you get that old feeling that you can't do something, you can only remember it's a reflection of your conditioning and not a reflection of your potential. Now, I want you to think about this. Everybody is familiar with the great Bruce Lee, perhaps the greatest martial artist that ever lived. And you know, he was also a great teacher. And very often they'd come to him and they'd say, "Could you tell us, Master, how we could be a great martial artist like you?" Now, he would take them out into a little gym and he would go through some of his moves. And what he was doing is he was trying to find out where they are. Because he said most people had the wrong information about martial arts. Just like many people have the wrong information about this word, success. This word success, this progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And after he'd take them through the little exam, he would sit down at a table, he'd put them on one end. He'd sit on the other end. And he'd put in front of them a glass of Coke. He'd say, "I want you to look at that and let it represent." Think about it now. He said, "I want you to let this glass of Coke represent your knowledge. This is what you know to be the truth." And he said, "I want you to let this clear water represent what is the truth. This is my knowledge. This is what I've learned." And he said, "This is what you want from me. This is what you want." I want you to think about one step here. How often have we looked into the lives of other people and we see things that we truly admire? We look at maybe their person, what I'd give to be like that individual. We look at what they have and we say, what I would give to have what they have. We look at what they do and we say, what I would give to do what they do. Folks, if we only knew, what we're looking at are nothing more but our own rejected thoughts. They accepted thoughts that we have rejected. So this is what Bruce said. "I can't give you my knowledge because, you see, there's too much of yours. However," he said, "if you are prepared to let go of yours and make room for mine, then we can work together. But as long as you hold on to this, I can't give you this." Think about it. Are you prepared to let go of what you've learned? And by that, I don't mean to just cast it aside, but to examine it. And to take a new idea that you will hear in 2 days here. A new idea. And to examine that idea, entertain that idea, to see if it will change, alter, and or improve the end result for a happier, healthier, more prosperous life. If you're prepared to do that, this program will really, really work for you. Will really work for you.
Consciousness has always existed because consciousness created the universe. Consciousness, whatever consciousness is, this universal sense of awareness of itself, the sentient manifest, it's always been there because it's created the universe. You know, we know now through quantum physics that everything that we create is appearing in front of us. There is no reality. We're spooling these potentials out of nothingness.
Back in the 1990s, I was working for a Wall Street company, and on my downtime I used to look out over the concrete canyons of Lower Manhattan. And one thing that always caught my mind and caught my eye was why so many of these skyscrapers, which were built during the early part of the 20th century, why so many of them had gargoyles on the side. Why were buildings which should have represented the forefront of modernity, the modern world and new thinking, you know, resplendent with motifs that belonged in the Gothic churches of the Middle Ages? And it wasn't until I saw the Fritz Lang movie Metropolis years later that it dawned on me what was really going on here. In that movie, everything took place inside a giant building called the New Tower of Babel. And what these gargoyles on the outside of these skyscrapers were, as they were in the Gothic churches, were the lineage, the heritage of the Babylonian demon worship cult, which began in Mesopotamia 2,500 years ago and became a symbolic archetypal motif for the consciousness parasite that was placed inside the human psyche all those centuries ago, and which to this day distorts, controls, pollutes, manipulates, and feeds off our consciousness. Our consciousness does not exist for our sake, it exists for the sake of the control system. And what you think you are and who you think you are and the world you live in is purely a ruse, a sleight of hand that has been embedded inside your consciousness to make you limited, to make you acquiescent to the controllers. The purpose of this film will be to break Babylon. The tower will fall. The tower is falling. We are at the point in history where we have no choice but to take sides. Either we fall with the tower or we regain our consciousness and we remove the parasite from our consciousness and fulfill the destiny that this moment in history has caused us and called us to rise to. It's now time to break Babylon. The tower will fall. Well, and people say to themselves, you know, how does my consciousness affect my physical reality? Well, it actually goes much deeper than that. It actually affects your neurological, condition. It actually will change the shape of your brain. It's now been shown conclusively that every time you have a thought, it actually changes your brain in terms of generating new synapses and actually building new neural pathways. You actually create the brain you need. Therefore, if you live within a limited construct of confined thinking, dogmatic alignment, your brain will represent that, and therefore you will never expand your consciousness beyond that scope. Now, many people who think they're highly intelligent or well educated are actually at a loss. The ones who are really developing their brains are the ones who are open to everything, even stuff that we're told is ludicrous and ridiculous. What they're doing is they're building their brain, and this is the last thing the controlled structure wants. It doesn't want you to have the maximum amount of mirror neurons, firing synapses and motor neurons to develop your brain to its full potential, because once you do that, you're able to tune into this reality into a much more effective way, and also alter that reality away from the ethos and the demands of the control system. Your stinking thinking will create a stinking brain, where your creative, imaginative thinking will do precisely the opposite. It will develop an imaginative brain. A lot of my work into psychopaths through my previous work had shown me beyond a shadow of a doubt that the psychopathic brain was quite different, because the underlying consciousness behind the psychopath did not need to develop the frontal cortex of their brain, because they didn't need to learn compassion, because they had no use for it, that they didn't need to develop the neural pathways to develop creativity, because they stole everything from everyone else, including their personalities and their ideas and their creativity. And this is why it's very important that we do not limit on any circumstances, no matter how ludicrous our thoughts are, that we do that, because what that does is essentially shuts down parts of our brain that we're not developing. This is why over-specialization is completely and totally indoctrinated within the educational system. They want you as specialized in your field as possible, for two reasons. One, they don't want the other fields all talking to each other, and secondly, they want the academics to have a tunnel vision consciousness, where they're incredible experts at the one thing that they study, whatever it is, archaeology, astronomy, but they know nothing else, because they've only tailored their brain from their underlying consciousness to develop the brain they need. This is something that we have to undo. Specialization is destroying our consciousness. It is not enhancing it. It is making us into machine minds that is not beneficial to the human race in terms of our personal, social and cultural evolution. We need to open up our minds, expand our consciousness, and develop a thrust within our own psyche towards open-mindedness, tolerance and compassion. This is one of the reasons people are, they're encouraged to shoot down any new opinion they haven't heard before. No matter how ludicrous it is, they will do it, because they've been conditioned to do this. The Babylon mind, it depends on specialization, it depends on conformity, it depends on an inability to grasp concepts outside the framework of the dogma and the doctrine. Consciousness is the underlying non-material mechanism which drives our participation within this reality. It's still dependent upon generating a brain and a nervous system in order for us to tune into this reality. materialistic and reductionist science is obsessed with the idea of consciousness residing in the brain itself, within the grey matter. This has never been proven. There are many, many unsolved mysteries to the brain. Now, before we look into these mysteries, we have to understand what the mind and the brain is. The mind is concerned with two things. You have function and you have structure. Function is the purpose of the brain and the mind. And this gives birth to the likes of psychology and what we call mental faculties. The structure of the brain is simply the form and the shape of the grey matter, how it functions, how it works, how the neuroelectrical and neurochemical activity takes place. Now, consciousness is not understood as a structure of the brain. It's never been seen in there. It's never been located in the actual brain itself, and remains a complete mystery to science. It's non-local. Consciousness is non-local to the brain. They will never ever find consciousness inside the brain itself. Each part of the brain has specialized partitions, and how they interact with each other in terms of how they talk to each other is still unknown. And the obvious answer there is consciousness is what does that. Time in the brain, this is very interesting. The concept of time and space-time in your brain is very different than it is as you experience it in the real world. Your mind seems to have the ability to time travel. It has been shown in some recent tests in Germany using MRIs that when a participant was asked a question, its brain knew the answer to the question 6 seconds, up to 6 seconds before it even heard the questions. So there's an element of time travel to human consciousness. This has also been shown in things like baseball. There's no way in terms of any kind of physical ability and in terms of physics that a baseball player can actually, with a bat in his hand, hit a ball coming to him at 100 miles an hour. The only way around it is that the baseball player goes forward in time. His consciousness now. He calculates the trajectory of the ball coming towards him, and then he goes back in time, and then the bat strikes the ball. There's no other way of doing it. So there's a time travel element to the human brain. Another one is intelligence. There's no objective standard to what actually intelligence is, and there's no real objective relationship ever been quantified to how imagination and perception relate to intelligence. So when someone is called someone of a low intelligence or a high intelligence, it's not really quantified as being relevant to anything other than, say, things like Mensa or academic tests, which do not measure creativity and imagination, which is another form of intelligence. The baseline activity of the brain in terms of how it should function is unknown. So when someone is accused, another person, of having a brain that isn't functioning properly, particularly in psychiatry, what's happening there is they're quantifying it according to an unknown baseline, which is one of the reasons why psychiatry is an appalling science and medical procedure. It's unknown how memory is stored in the brain. Weil Penfield and Sir John Eccles, who are two of the greatest neuroscientists that ever lived, both agree that memory is not stored inside the brain. And how information itself, how me talking to you, you receiving this message, how that's encoded in the brain within neural activity is a complete mystery, which undermines all psychiatry. And this is where the Babylon hive mind has set forth to destroy our consciousness in recent times, particularly in the last 100 years with the birth of psychiatry, is to encode information in our brain which perverts our psychology. our souls from us.
In my own art, I have a tendency to implement traditional rules of design such as the golden section and the Fibonacci sequence. The purpose of this is to make the image more appealing while at the same time creating a sort of a transcendental dialogue between the viewer and my own work. My artwork is very much an interpretation of my own subconsciousness at the time the painting was being done. I often implement and use techniques in much of my Celtic art that was borrowed from iconic art of the Middle Ages, where a halo would be put behind the face of a saint or deity. I do the same thing myself in many of my own artworks. The purpose for this, it creates and changes the melatonin and serotonin levels in the viewer's mind and creates a sense of calm and ease. This causes the viewer to contemplate the full meaning of the work, and as a result, it's a contemplation of their own soul. You can see examples of how I use classical rules of design such as the golden section in my following paintings. Please pay careful attention to how light is used to convey allegory and metaphor as much as it is used to create shadow and depth. It's in that light and shadow that the true meaning of the work is found. What do the arts have to offer humans in order to see the inner cosmos which the material approach alone cannot reveal to them? And what does spirituality tell us about the meaning of visual arts in ways that art history does not convey? The American mythologist Joseph Campbell often dealt with this materialist dilemma. Campbell believed that all spirituality is, in a sense, a search for a universal unknown, a force which exists, from which everything came, in which everything currently exists, and into which everything will eventually return. This search is ultimately towards the unknowable, because it has existed from a time before humans evolved their language. So this basic driving force of our humanity cannot be solely expressed in words or pictures. It can only be referred to through spiritual rituals, arts and stories, which use metaphors and allegories embedded within various legends. The deities and the objects of spirituality we see in the world, this creative magic, would be a combination of all these factors. If you think of the Genesis myth in the Bible, it is not a literal description of actual events, but it's rather a story of it with a poetic metaphorical meaning
and it should be examined for these insights concerning the fundamental truths of our world and our personal existence. Therefore, art, mythology, and spirituality are all bound up together as transcendental pathways towards the fundamental truths of how the universe was created. A process of transfiguration is required to make new mythology and new arts in order to bypass materialistic dead ends. The use of symbolism in religion is a universal phenomenon, and it is common for religious practices to involve the creation of images and symbols to represent supernatural beings and ideas. Because supernatural beings violate the principles of our material world, there will always be difficulty in conveying and sharing supernatural concepts with others. This problem can be overcome by anchoring these supernatural beings within the material world through representational art. When translated into material form, supernatural concepts become easier to communicate and understand. For this reason, science alone will never explain why humans create art for this purpose. Psychology, it does much better, but it gets off the highway one exit too soon in explaining the instinctual trust of the creative process. Likewise, philosophy brings a closer understanding, but again falls short. In order to gain a more holistic insight into the concept of art being a magical process which serves a very real purpose in human development, we must look towards myth and metaphor. Among the many creation stories we have in the world, there's one that always sticks with me, is the Nat tradition of India. When I first heard this creation myth, it struck a very deep chord in me, because it symbolizes and underpins the purpose of creativity in all the arts and how we're actually creating the universe going forward, the material universe, from these creative processes. And also it drives home why we should not allow this pathological symbolism of the elites and the ruling oligarchs to control our future destiny. The Nat tradition, which began around the 8th century, is a heterodox Sindhat tradition which views the supreme absolute reality as the basis supporting all aspects and manifestation of consciousness. The basis of the Nat religion consists of various systems of tantric yoga, which are aimed at the transubstantiation of the human body into a divine immortal form. The term Nat itself is derived from the name of the god Shiva and is the literally meaning Lord. The Nat creation story of the universe is also a powerful metaphor for the artistic process. It's also a creative metaphor in the sense of a warning for the artistic process, and in particular symbolism and imagery, as we see today in advertisement, being used against the development of our consciousness. In the mythology, there are the 3 stages of the absolute. First, there is the absolute, which is a field or matrix of the underlying universe. Then consciousness and matter were created out of the absolute. And from this, consciousness and matter began to have a conversation, and from this the material world was created. And this drives home why we must defend our psyche against any kind of pathological symbolism or pernicious simulacra that's imposed upon us by our elites. We will literally create the universe we do not want if we do not defend our psyche and build a firewall against what's being put into it by exterior extraneous forces. This includes visual and spoken and audio inputs, which is imposing into our psyche and destroying our consciousness. The language of feeling itself, of emotion, is not a private language at all. It is more of a social system of symbols that are understood by those who have learned its conventions and usages. But the underlying response is instinctual, in that one does not require an artistic education in order to be deeply emotionally empowered by viewing and experience art or symbolism. The presentation of emotions is the domain of artistic discourse. Whatever the medium of expression, it doesn't matter. This is where the artist, the creator, and we are all creators, becomes the conduit between the higher aspects of one's consciousness and the collective consciousness, and thereby our own unique creative vision inserts this into the consciousness of the viewer, in effect placing them under a spell. Art is a magical process. Symbolism is a magical process. Music, the spoken word, literature, drama are all magical processes, whereby out of the field of our consciousness, by means of our hands, voice, or dance movements, creates the art. The drive for this is magic. The results are often magical, and even surprisingly very practical at times. Artists are the sorcerers who make it manifest into the material world. An important aspect in protecting one's consciousness is to get back in touch with nature. By nature, I just don't mean going out there and seeing a few trees and animals and birds and looking at some nice scenery. Nature extends to things beyond what we see with our eyes during a walk in the countryside. For instance, not many people today see all the stars in the sky because of light pollution. That's a disconnect from nature. People don't even see the night anymore. That's a disconnect from nature. It's very difficult to hear birdsong with all the traffic noise and background noise. That's a disconnect from nature. What's especially important is the loss of nighttime. We don't experience the night the way we're supposed to. We don't experience the natural cycles of day and night the way we're supposed to. And this affects hormonal changes within our brain. Chinese artists were known to live for long periods of time in the wilds, among nature and all its manifestations, in order to lose themselves completely in the natural environment before painting it. One artist, Mei Fei, came to consider a boulder he had become fascinated with as his brother, which is a very druidic concept. Another Chinese painter, Fan Kuo, who lived about 1,000 years ago, spent his time almost exclusively in the mountains and forests, spending the whole day on a rocky outcrop, surveying the landscape. This was designed as a meditative exercise in order to drink in the beauty of the countryside around him. Even during cold weather, he would wander in the moonlight to gain insight and inspiration. Clearly, when we hear stories like these, we're not dealing with purely visual representations as the end result of the creative process, considering the lengths some of these artists would go through in order to feel nature and tap into the underlying mystical energy of the landscape. We've lost this today. You cannot get that in a city. You can barely get it in the countryside in the West anymore. A later Chinese painter, Cao Ko-ming, who lived in the 10th century AD, was so obsessed with darkness and silence to the point where he would spend many nights roaming around, lost in the otherworldliness of his meditative nocturnal wanderings. Upon returning to his home, he would not allow himself to be disturbed until his soul passed beyond the bounds of reality. During these meditative trances, he would begin to paint. These Taoist painters of China would become lost in the nocturnal meditations in order to find artistic inspiration. And Vincent van Gogh later on himself expressed in letters to his brother Theo that there were more colours in the night than in the daytime. This is the same reason why cave artists painted in the dark, and why many magical rituals are performed at night. The night creates a more powerful sense of inner vision. There is a creative magic in the night. There is a sense of knowing in the darkness, and there is an honesty and an insight in the still of the midnight hour. It is also why we play music and go to rock concerts and plays at night inside darkened venues. The impact is greater and we see with more clarity. It's also one of the reasons the controllers spellbind us with these pageantries that take place at night. This is also why our elites prefer nighttime processions and nighttime parades, because they know the intensity of the visuals, particularly in terms of lights and sound, against the darkness, will have a greater penetration were into our consciousness and make us easier to control. Tragically, we live in an age where most people no longer see much natural light apart from the sun, if even that anymore. The nighttime skies all over the world have been destroyed by light pollution. The magic of the night has become a non-experience for most people these days, even for those who live in rural locations.
In many religious traditions, the right hand symbolizes the hand of God. It would be used for shaking hands, praying, turning the pages of a holy manuscript or a Bible or a holy book of some kind. It would be used by the priest to hand communion in a Catholic church. It is used in many cultures to eat because it's seen as the clean hand. The right hand is generally viewed in post-Babylonian culture as the hand of God. But how true is this? The left and right side of our brains do not control the sides of their bodies which they are related to. For instance, the right side of the brain controls the left hand. The left side of the brain controls the right hand, due to the way that the neural network is wired. It's the same for all the locomotory organs in our bodies, our eyes, our ears. Left side of the brain controls right, right side of the brain controls left. And you may ask yourself then, quite rightly, if the right hand, which is allegedly the hand of God, is controlled by the left side of the brain, then which God is on the left side of the brain? The answer is God exists in both hemispheres, and God is a dualistic expression of both, just like the DNA helix has two strands that wind. They're only DNA if they have both strands, not if they have one. The right side of the brain processes our creativity, our intuitive compassion, and more emotive, and our relationship to our higher selves. It may seem on a superficial level to be where our consciousness resides, or how we should like to see our consciousness or think of our consciousness. In reality, these attributes also exist to a lesser degree on the left side of the brain, which tends to be more analytical and more questioning, more critical. But like everything else in nature, the duality is not absolute. Just like a man has nipples, there's a mixture of both sides of the dualist concept within the whole. And it is that whole which makes the complete, which makes the one. In the past, when children used to draw or write with their left hand, it would often be beaten out of them, sometimes under appalling levels of cruelty, such as tying it behind their back, until they learned to eventually write with their right hand. This barbaric treatment happened for a reason. It didn't happen for conformity. There was a real reason for this. The control system was very much terrified of left-handed people, because left-handed people would generally have attributes that right-handed people didn't have. They tended to be more creative, although that's not necessarily the case. But in general they do. It's because their left hand is wired directly to their right brain, the more creative part of the brain, the more artistic part of the brain. So this is how the left and right path was taken by the control system, beginning in Babylon, and forced apart. Once you create divisions, hierarchical structure and specialization, you're essentially splitting the human brain in two. The septum between the two brains becomes a non-entity within the actual neurological structure. Now this is very interesting in terms of why we are so easily controlled in terms of going to war. It's now been demonstrated that the septum is what prevents our reptilian complex at the base of our brainstem from overriding our human brain and turning us into predators. If you have a balanced, centered view of the world, where you use both left and right sides of your brain equally, you will have a balanced consciousness. You will have a higher level of consciousness, and you're less likely to resort to your primitive reptilian brain, which is where psychopaths exist, in that reptilian brainstem, which is flooded with melanin and is the color blue, like all the blue bloods we've had to deal with since Babylon. The control system does not want you to develop a full, complete utilization of your brain hemispheres. It's too dangerous. It stops control. It creates freedom of thought. It creates non-judgment. It removes the ego. It brings forth empathy. Likewise, it is not a good idea to be over-reliant on the right hemisphere. We need our left hemisphere also to survive in this reality which we create for ourselves. Okay, one of the ways we can reconfigure our neural pathways is how we can learn to observe things differently than how they're presented to us. In the same way that, say, an Egyptian hieroglyph was more than just a means of writing. It was a way of conveying a charged symbolism through various allegories and designs. The negative spaces around the actual image was just as vital to how the message was presented as the actual pictorial graphic itself. You can actually retrain your brain to develop new neural pathways away from the predictive analytical method that was imposed upon you by your education, how we perceive things through advertising and television. One of the easiest ways you can do this is to get yourself a piece of card painted white on one side and black on the other. You use the white side to look at magazines' artwork close up by laying it on top of it. This allows you to examine the individual graphics, the design and the patterns in a very different way than how it's presented by the advertiser. It's almost like co-opting the message that's being sent out by the advertiser and imposing a simulacra of your own upon elements within the design. When you take the black part outdoors, you can use this in the same way for observing nature in ways that you normally don't do. It will allow you to focus directly upon images close up and at a distance to allow you to observe them in a much more meticulous method. This also will help generate new neural pathways and new ways of perception within your brain that will switch away from the left mode analytical brain and towards the right mode balance, to give you a more left-right balance in terms of how you perceive things, acquire knowledge and develop your consciousness going forward from that point. When we see a spiral and when we draw a spiral, it's very important to draw spirals. What is happening is you're not only looking at a two-dimensional object which spirals out from itself and into itself, but you're also looking at a three-dimensional object that represents changes in time and space. The spiral not only comes out from itself, from the center, but the spiral also goes back in time into itself, into infinity, and spirals out again from this. The spiral is also synonymous with the number 9 for obvious reasons, because 9 itself, the shape of the letter, looks very much like a spiral, a simplified spiral, but we can see the genesis of the spiral there. In the tarot, number 9 is represented by the Hermit card. The Hermit card represents reflection, pause for thought, taking time out, assessing and looking for new possibilities. Very much similar to the experience we have when we contemplate a spiral or where we enter a labyrinth. We have a shift in dimension, a shift in consciousness. The labyrinth always represents a shifting in consciousness, a shifting in dimension. This is why the labyrinth always takes us in and out on the same path. As we pass through the labyrinth, we are transformed. We have passed through a living stargate. When we seek to find simulacra, that is, shapes that we see, or faces in trees, or shapes in clouds that remind us of objects, we're not only developing our right brain away from our analytical left brain, and we're recapturing that magic of childhood, we are also outlining a blueprint for our own existence. At the time of the simulacra, it's very important to stress that we are not the end product in a totality sense of all the sum experiences in our lives. When we have a dream, as Jung has shown us, and we experience that dream symbol, it is only a particular insight into the individual at that moment in their life. Likewise, a simulacra and what it reminds you of is also only a contemporary insight into how your brain is thinking at the moment. It is not a blueprint to your entire existence, either on a conscious or a subconscious level. This is why we in the West tend to take the shamanic experience far too literally. Unlike native peoples, we've forgotten the ability and the necessity of carrying two meanings within a story, a metaphor or an allegory. We become far too literal. We do have it, of course, in the West. We have it in literature all the time, particularly from the Victorian era. We have it in the poetry, the artwork and the writings of the Romantic era in England at the turn of the 18th and 19th century, particularly in the work of people like William Blake and Mary Shelley. Later on in the operas of Wagner, you're given two messages. This is why so many of the characters within Wagner operas are portrayed in dark and light, in shade and brightness, in shadow and in illumination. One message the opera is conveying is on a direct literal level. There's a second level that's carried as a subtext that goes right into your subconscious. A book such as Ulysses by James Joyce may on the surface seem gobbledygook and nonsensical, but Joyce, being a trained Jesuit, was very, very clever. He had a very, very intense Jesuitic education, and he was very aware of the ability to carry a subconscious message within inside a conscious delivery. When he wrote Finnegan's Wake, the text on the page may seem to be nonsensical, but he was writing and conveying a narrative directly towards the reader's subconscious. It was the negative or the doppelganger of a traditional novel. It is unnatural for a human being to be happy all the time, as it is unnatural for a human being to be sad all the time. The universe is energy ultimately, and this energy is created by the friction or the interaction of polar opposites. An energy, you see that in the creation of electricity, an energy force that's caused by two magnetic fields, one negative and one positive interacting, and this generates an electric current and we have energy. Well, our lives work the same way. We need the ups and downs in order to create energy, and that energy is ultimately the creation of the universe itself. You will never get meaningful art from a society that preaches happiness. You will never get a meaningful life either. This is one of the reasons I'm so much against psychiatry. Modern psychiatry is a neuroses in and of itself. It's based on the notion that human beings are meant to be happy all the time. We are basically lab rats in this experiment to create artificial happiness. An artificial happiness rooted on a fear of death, which is ultimately rooted on a fear of living and living the way we're supposed to live, and that includes the positives and the negatives. And this requires, to transcend this issue, a whole new way of seeing. We must look for the simulacras and the negative spaces, and we must deprogram the indoctrination that has made us left brain dominated and suppressed our right brain, which is also representative of the feminine aspects of all humanity. And it's time to take that back. For a long time now, people have wondered what the issue is with modern art. It doesn't seem to reflect any kind of beauty, any kind of substance in a spiritual level, certainly not on an emotional level. Modern art is a reflection of the elites and their mindset, would be the obvious sort of superficial comment that people would make when they come into a modern art gallery such as the Tate Modern in London. It's always been like this. This is one of the great misunderstandings. There's always been a debase and soul-destroying element to the elite's art. If you look at the paintings of the late Renaissance, they will often have the most horrific scenes in them. Even to go to the Louvre in Paris and see all these grand religious paintings, many of them project images of violence. They're not particularly soul-enhancing, and they're certainly not empowering of the human spirit. Some of them are rather absurd, creepy almost. What are these images of naked children as cherubs all over these paintings which belong to the wealthy, the elites, and the church fathers? These are very serious questions that must be asked. Why the obsession with naked children? And today we have the modern art scene, which is composed mainly of young superstars who manufacture installations, they're called, which again have no meaning and seem very absurd to most people who view them. There is a commercial reason for this. It's called gaslighting. Gaslighting is a term used in psychology when a pathological individual or system tries to alter your sense of reality, to change the world so you accept a new normal. When advertising first came along, good quality advertising in terms of colour printing and large billboards about 100 years ago, the advertising makers, the artists, the producers, the printers, along with the corporations who commissioned them to make this artwork, had to make sure that the art that was contained inside the art galleries and inside the public art spaces was not more beautiful than the advertising art. And this is why public spaces today are filled with art that has no beauty and no meaning. So when you come out and you see billboards or a video game or a TV ad, you think it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen just because of its colour combinations compared to what's in the art galleries today. And what art collectors today are telling us is cutting edge art of our time. This is the Babylon mind gaslighting us again in the 21st century, just like they did 3,000-4,000 years ago, using torch-lit processions to rob people of their spirituality. Now they do it with things like the Turner Prize.
With the advent of Freudian therapy, and in particular the seduction theory in the late Victorian era, war on children began. Essentially, a war was declared upon childhood and innocence in order to capitalize on children, to make them consumers as early as possible. An integral part of this was the sexualization of children. Freud's seduction theory scientifically validated this belief that children could be sexualized and therefore made into consumers at a younger age. If you look at things like Disney, you see things like the Princess programming. Boys will learn how to fight in future wars. In video games, not long after Freud's seduction theory was released, H.G. Wells produced a little book that was essentially designed through using model soldiers to teach young boys how to kill and believe that war was noble. The Princess program that has been given to us, originally through fairy tales to warn us about psychopaths, was co-opted by Disney and then used to create a psychosexual motif in young girls from Tinkerbell on. This pernicious assault upon children has been based upon everything from their toys to their clothing, and even down to things like the chocolates and the candy bars they eat. You'll often find that many of these products have a subtle Freudian sexual aspect to them. And this is not an accident. This has been done on purpose ever since Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, went to the United States from Austria and invented propaganda, public relations, and then eventually what we have today, the marketing. This then continues on in later life, particularly on women. The psychopathic control grid, Babylon's main tool for destruction of the psyche today, is against females. They've taken away the notion that a woman is a mother, a nurturer, a protector, a nurse, a maven, and given us appalling programs like Sex and the City, Desperate Housewives, and all these various other things from footballers' wives, and on to extending the reach of the pornographic industry into women of all ages. A middle-aged woman is not a cougar. A middle-aged woman is not a MILF. A middle-aged woman is a woman. The combination of all these things together have essentially attempted to rob the human race of their soul. And then they fill it in, after they've taken it from us, with things like psychotherapy. If you break the word psychotherapy up, you get psycho the rapist. The root word of psycho is a Greek word psyche, which means the soul. They have been raping our souls. This is seen very clearly in things like Hollywood and other celebrities who indulge in fake and phony altruism, from the Alec Baldwins to the Michael Moores to the Bob Geldof. They have no souls themselves, so they attempt to fool the rest of us into believing they have a soul. When you don't have a soul, your main agenda is to pretend you have one. The more wealth and success these Hollywood celebrities, captains of industry, and aristocrats attain is only further proof of how empty their souls are. So they seek to fool the rest of us into believing that they have a soul through their fake altruism and phony charity work. And the more money you have, the more time you will spend trying to fool people into believing you have a soul.
twilight, the dark night of the soul, the brink of important changes, the darkest moment before the dawn. This is why the elites are obsessed with it. Lucifer, the morning star, does not represent the beginning of a new day. It represents eternal bondage to the state where transition never happens. It's locked within androgyny. This is why the elites are obsessed with androgynous states. An androgynous person is neither male nor female. There is no duality. There is no up, there is no down. There is no left, there is no right. There is no positive, there is no negative. And therefore, there can be no flux. Flux from depression to elation is what creates new energies. We see this all the time in psychiatry. They treat depression as an unnatural state. Depression is a perfectly natural state. It's that depression and the raising up from the lower states of our consciousness to the higher states, the flux between the two, that generates new tangents, new possibilities, and a new day for all of us. A new day of a new liberated consciousness. One of the reasons we have this proliferation of vampire shows, the interesting titles to do with dawn, twilight, the beginning of the day, dusk, is also for the same reason. They want to trap us in the dark night of the soul so we never reach the new day. They've also encouraged us to worship the psychopath, but not in an allegorical sense. What these psychopathic shows on TV, which are all over the place now, represent is the psychopath. The psychopath has been made appealing and attractive because the pathology of the ruling elites in the media are passing and projecting this down upon us. They've dehumanized the rest of us while humanizing the predator. Just like in coastlines like this all over the world, being battered by the elements, being battered by nature, being battered by the wind, being battered by the surf. Our psyche and consciousness is the same way. We're being battered by external stimuli in the form of social control, conditioning, education, advertising, symbolism. The wind is not the wind of the ocean currents, but it's the sonic winds of pernicious noise which gets into us and controls us. It's the music of the absurd. And just like the coasts all over the world, we're all affected by this in an individual way. But the issue remains that we're being molded, carved, and shaped by an external stimuli. And our personalities is a result of that. Our personality is a result of these forces impacting upon us, rather than our internal being finding its own path out and creating a personality and an appearance and a persona from that point on. We're all facsimiles of mirrors, and those mirrors are all mirrors that were built and constructed by the control system. A natural coastline is natural. The coastline of your consciousness is artificial unless you start rejecting the external stimuli and working your way from the inside out. Then you become what you were meant to be, as opposed to what you have been made.
The tower must fall. The tower must fall.
The tower has already fallen. The tower in our mind is no longer standing.
Sorry about that. I have hotkeys, shortcut keys, and I don't know why I pressed. It's yeah. Anyways, it was when I was helping out with the Julian Assange thing. And I had myself muted, so I couldn't even. So you guys didn't even hear what I was saying. Sorry about that. So I thought it was very interesting. I think it was useful information. Again, I am not there at certain people's levels. I think everyone has to get there on their own or a different way. When one person goes to a destination, there's more than one way to get to that destination. Sorry. And the thing is, it's been paved. The way to get to that destination for all of us, it's been paved. The bigger the road, the more likely you're going to travel that way. When there is no road, most likely you're not going to go that way. If there's no trail, you're not going to go through that trail. You're not going to forge your own path. You could be going there on land. That's the most usual way to get there. But you could go through there by air, by sea. If those ways are available. And that to get to an end path, however you take your journey is going to be different than my journey. My journey is going to be different than yours. At the end, despite our different pathways, if we get to the same destination, we come to the same realization, and we didn't really work together in getting there. That might have thrown out some information, suggestions. I might have done the same, but you get to a certain point, to the same point I get to, and we see other people who've gotten to that same point. Oh man, I hate flies, I tell you. That kind of gives you a good insight as, hey, we're all here at this destination, and we all take different paths to get here, and that's just the main one. And we're seeing something that's, I don't know, that's unique, I guess. And that's creativity, uniqueness. Because in perspectives and interpretations, that's also great. Later on, he talks about literature, and people are just always taking literally just the literal version aspect of it, but there's another level that's subconscious or unconscious, however way you like to use those terms. And symbolism is used quite a bit, or some type of allegory or metaphor, and that's what I'm revisiting. I'm seeing, as I've been growing up, and I was educated through the public system. I went to university, went to the U.S. Navy. I left. So now, after all that, I went my own path. I kind of specialized in one section of technology and realized all it is more specialization, more experience, more money, more problems, and it's harder to disconnect from that. And I think the other aspect of him stating that we need to disconnect and kind of get back in touch with nature, I agree. And loss of nighttime is a problem. I agree with that. And when you see studies, and I used to see the studies all the time, especially back in Boston, I forgot which university it was, they would talk about, they would have these daytime studies. Basically, you would stay in a room, no sense of time, they would never turn off the lights. They would make sure the lights were always on. You could communicate with outside people through email. They filter your email to make sure that you don't know what time it is, you don't know what day it is, etc., etc. And they follow your natural rhythms and things like that. And they paid a hefty sum of money. So I think it was like 2 months of that, whether you can do the whole 2 months or what. I think it was something like $5,000 to $10,000 for each month, which is a lot of money. It'd be interesting to see what it. It would have been interesting to experience that. I think I talked with someone who did that. I don't remember exactly what that person said as far as what it was like, but I think that's where I got the details from. Let's see. As far as the consciousness for the sake of the control system, you know, all that's unknown. Souls, etc., is unknown. Fall of the Tower of Babylon. Whether you fall with the Tower of Babylon or you gain consciousness is unknown. That's a belief system, but of course, this entire journey is some form of belief notion. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes going down that path can have the consequences where nothing changes. Once you are settled in the fact that you firmly know everything or know something absolutely, and it's in a belief system where it's not known whether that's the case or not, you fall into the trap of not exploring other potentials, because you're at that end where you don't need to question anymore. You're fine where you're at. Everything around you is, whether it's falling apart, crumbling, it becomes, oh, it's intended to be that way, whether it's through God or your own God or powerlessness or what have you, that you just become too settled and failing to adapt, failing to make a difference. But again, that's just one of the traps that I see. Not necessarily that all beliefs in things are bad. Sometimes you can believe in something, not believe that it's absolute. Let's see. Specialization is bad. I agree with that. A psychopath brain is different, and they didn't have to learn compassion. There was no use for it, no need for creativity. They just stole it from everyone else. I agree with that. Talks about the reptilian brain, the animalistic brain. I can agree with that. Let's see. Memory is not stored inside the brain gave me a little bit of pause. It's kind of like a whoa, but again, he didn't go into specifics, so I don't know exactly what he means by that. I probably wouldn't agree with it until I research on my own, which is what I may have to do. He goes about with consciousness will never be found in the brain. It's an unknown, but I think it might be likely. There are things that cannot be measured by even the most adept and advanced, or what do you call it, elite, or whatever you call it, the highest level of scientific minded people. Many things are still immeasurable. Some things are still unknown, and a lot of people say, yeah, I don't know is the answer, and that's okay. Concept of time in the brain is different. I have to agree with that. I have had I think drugs can definitely factor that in two ways. I mean, simplest way is, you know, the term where time flies when you're having fun. That definitely seems to occur when your mind is busy with something. Sometimes you wish you had more time for it, and then all of a sudden you don't have time for it anymore because it's over. Sometimes when it's just boring, there's nothing to do, your brain isn't really working at anything, it's just kind of You're just sitting there. Time seems to slow down quite fast. And that's perception. One of the things I tried is, or I used, was weed. I tried marijuana, and it was very crazy because it amplified whatever my thoughts were. And at a certain point, there would be passes of, or lapses of time. Lapses of, for example, I was operating and I could know that I was doing something at a certain time, but then it would just be fast forwarded, and I'm already at the next stage of the present. And I can't remember what the previous stage was, and all of a sudden it would fast forward again and I'd be at the next stage, and it's like, I don't know exactly how I got there, but I'm here and I'm doing what the actions I'm doing, and you pretty much lose your sense of time. And it's definitely not the time that you would have if you weren't under any type of psychedelics. And then there's the dreams. I've had dreams in the past where I don't remember them at all, until the time where it actually happened in real life. And then when that happened, I would remember that I had a dream about it, and everything was in picturesque detail. And I go, whoa, deja vu. Now let's stop there and I'll think about it and try to remember where that sense of deja vu came from, and it came from dreams. So how I found that specific part of the present in the past, in a dream, in my unconscious. Yeah, it could be coincidental. It could be something else. I don't know. The mind is funny that way. Can't rule it out. I'll just say that. And certain dreams that I still remember, and I've expressed, and Perseus has taken note of it and let me know. And I thought that was interesting, why I would hold that and reveal it in someone that eventually crossed my path into whatever my journey is and his journey, and what I've been diving into as far as the core, esoteric, whatever you want to call it. Had I not been going down this path and exploring, I would never have known the interpretation of that dream would be kind of coincide with the age of Aquarius and all that stuff, how it might be pertain to certain things. So it gets very, very interesting as far as that. Let's see. One thing I noticed is when he talked about the Harriman card, I think that's a tarot card, and talked about what its meaning was. All I could see was just kind of a magician, and it reminded me of Saruman from Lord of the Rings. It was supposed to be what that was, and if you look at the spelling, it's exactly the same, except there's an S in front of Haruman to make Saruman. And of course, we know Saruman didn't end up being what he was supposed to be, and ended up kind of going down a different path, and thus lost his powers in some ways or form. Universe is energy. I've been hearing that a lot. I think I don't know yet. It's unknown. There's a lot of matter. A lot of it is attracted to each other in some electrical form. I think that holds basis. But again, I'm new at this, so I have to do my own exploration. As far as gaslighting, Freud, sexualization of children, H.G. Wells, teaching children how to kill, etc., and the entertainment industry, and how we're being molded and shaped by external forces, I agree with that. We see it all the time. And I think that's where the external forces, that their grand plan into getting one of just that singularity that they're trying to find is going to be their ultimate failing. I think that it's an impossibility, and the creativity of individuals will always overcome the stagnation of solidarity, or ideology, I would say, might be a better word for it. Because when you're all in the mindset of being a clone in thoughts and maneuvers and thinking, it's easy to overcome that, and it's harder to adapt. Basically, it's the hive mind versus the individual mind. There's been stories, I think one of my favorite, again, in sci-fi, is the book Ender's Game. If you've never read it, it's a great book, one of my favorites. And it has to do with, some things may only work once, but sometimes that's all that's needed. But you also, and you can see different variations of it within sci-fi as well, maybe even just fiction books. If you think about the Star Trek, The Next Generation with the Borg, when you would shoot at them, you might kill them, but then they'll just up their shield level ability, and then the next shot they wouldn't affect the Borg, so they would go and increase their energy, and they would kill them until they're at their maximum point, and they have to think of other ways to stop the Borg. It's the same way. You have to, in order to defeat them, and I think that's one of the great things about stories, where creativity can lend a hand, is the creative processes as far as to stop what's oncoming, or a destructive process, whatever it is, that it takes the creativity of individuals to find a way out of what is going on, and to end that system, or end that cycle. For me, it's ending the system. For others, it's just ending the cycle and creating the same cycle again and again, and hoping to live through that. And we're going to be different. I know Perseus is listening. Because in a time where we're going through the cycle again for the next time, and living through the good times of it until it starts to become bad, the eventuality, inevitableness of that, people, when they're living in good times, refuse to change and see the things that are bad within that system, and therefore the cycle would always repeat itself. And maybe as far as the way of seeing things, the world, like the person Thomas Sheridan was saying, that you kind of need the good with the bad, and maybe that's why there is a cycle, and that's why it has to keep repeating itself. And I might be going against myself in some ways, where others want the singularity, at least the powers that be seem to want that, those that are in control now of the system or within the system. And then me, if to end that singularity, to never have a cycle that goes to be a big unknown. But in my perspective for it, it's that big unknown is what we need in order for us to grow and become more creative. And I think this was kind of touched upon in the later works of the Dune series by Frank Herbert. If you guys haven't read the Dune series, read the Dune series. Again, we're going through science fiction again. It's that's the thing, is we can't be all on the same path to the same end, because that's where we'll head towards. We're going to get to that same end, and life shouldn't get towards an end, because the end is just death. When everything's dead, nothing really matters anymore. So the fight is now. We're alive. We realize we're alive. We exist whether we perceive that we exist or not, whether we have souls or we don't. We're in the now, and we're in the bodies that we're in. We're in the time that we're in. We're in the cycle that we're in. Wherever it is, we're at present. And therefore, we need to make our actions regarding the present to shape our future. Whether we control the past or the present, that's kind of I think that's another one of those rabbit holes. In my opinion, doesn't matter, but I'm still open to looking into it. Because at the end, it's just our individual pursuits, our individual journeys. We're not going to be able to persuade someone or force someone to do something if they don't want to. It's all about whether you want to or not. I would rather have it that you want to be free, that you would want to go on your own journey and not follow in someone else's footsteps, that you can come up with your own creativity and not just steal and take from someone else's. And I think if you have children, one of the great things to do is to just practice telling them stories that you make up by yourself. And I do that with my daughter, and she loves it. Last night she wanted 3 stories that I made up, and sometimes she wants me to revisit those stories and just continue on from them. And I have no idea what I'm going to say next or what's next in the storyline. I don't really think about it. It just occurs naturally, and I think that's a great practice, because my wife, she tries it. It was bad, but the thing is, she can't get any better at it if she doesn't try. And as far as the idea of a left, right, and disassociation or association and all that stuff that Thomas Sheridan was talking about in documentary, I think that's good. I think it's true. Can't be specialists. When he got the little square kind of box where it's basically cut out, it's white on one side, black on the other, duality again. For me, and the whole talk about specialization, I think that has merit. We're all given a piece of the puzzle, every one of us. We see that puzzle or that piece, and we reside within that piece. We can't see that big picture. We can't see the other puzzles, because we're okay with just having that one piece of the puzzle, and we're fine with it. But then we're those of us that are on journeys to find the truth, that of what it may reveal, and we're not okay with just the piece that we have. We're asking to see the other people's pieces. That's what this is about. This is why I try to let anyone come on in the public to talk and share their experiences, share their thoughts, share their journeys, as far as it not taking over someone else's space, as far as what they want to share, provide feedback on, especially for a certain topic, as far as agents or The Walking Dead, as far as those that might be in some gonzo network or what have you. Am I a doppelganger of some Jimmer nation? You guys are basically mind controlled, and you guys are fit into the system, a system that you don't like, and you're lashing out, and that's fine. It's your own journey. But as far as getting to see the other pieces and revealing yours, we get to see a bigger picture, and we're starting to see that now, especially with the internet. And we're starting to see a bigger picture. Everyone's working towards it. We're not dividing and conquering. We're uniting and letting ourselves be attacked, be hit, be stymied from time to time, whatever forces, whether it's through the agents or Walking Dead, you might say, or the ones out, basically those that are also mind controlled, that are used by the system, used by the people who want to protect and uphold the system, the establishment. That's why I usually call agents. But eventually we're going to need those pieces that you provide as well, and whether you care to, when the system is going to fall, and it's going to, you're powerless to stop it, because you don't think it's a possibility to stop it, and that you hold powers that you can use towards others to keep them in their enslavement and their entrapment. But that's not going to happen, and you know it. Eventually you're going to say, okay, I'm with you. I am my own individual. I'm free. I don't have to obey these masters. And there's going to be someplace I call a haven. Think about a heaven. You see how close words can be as far as each other. Maybe I mean, heaven is just basically another placement for a haven. So it's you get to break out of your shell. You get to be what you can be as far as an individual, whether it's through your spirituality, whether it's through your physicality, or whether through it's whatever. You get to grow. You don't get to be molded and shaped and kept that way. And whoever our enemies are, our greatest enemies, of course, is ourselves. So as far as enemies I've never seen or met or had to go face to face with, that's not the now. Sometimes I may think it is, but it's not. Until that happens, then yes, there are real physical enemies and entities that we may have to face. And whether we use force and violence, it just remains to be seen. But the premise should be that you're always willing to get into that point of physicality. We are physical beings, and it's just one of those things. Of course, you don't see me storming out there initiating and causing violence to these perpetrators that I may think are corrupt, and I believe they are, and I think they are. I shouldn't say believe so much, because I'm just waiting for the time when it comes down to me, where it's acted upon me or my family or my loved ones. And how that's going to happen eventually too. I don't know. I think that's kind of it. No one came on. I wish there were people that came on. I will be gone for a few hours, and again, I'll probably be on tonight. I'll see you guys around. I try not to talk so much. I like to, you know, people see, people know my piece of the puzzle, and I'm trying to clear up any type of smudges and dirt and whatever it is, so people can have a clearer picture of it, because I don't really have a clear picture of my piece of the puzzle. But eventually I'll find it. I'll have it available for everyone to see clearly, and I hope to find other pieces of puzzles so we can kind of see the bigger picture out there and keep going. So I'll see you guys later. Thank you for joining me.